Hello and welcome to today's video. It won't surprise you to know that today's video is about how on earth you offer a personal response. Can you just write anything? What does the examiner really want? And this question comes to me from a viewer called Revision. So this one's for you. Assessment Objective 1 is the one that includes this idea about the personal response. But what it really wants to focus on is how you explore interpretations and how you quote to back those interpretations up. So really personal response is just what you've always done in English literature essays. But I've broken it down to you into 4 key things that you must do. Begin with the author's purpose at the beginning of your essay, and that automatically tells the examiner, this is my personal response. Next, we're going to take the author's purpose and link it to some aspect of symbolism. So I'm going to use an inspector calls to show you this, but it works with any text. For example, if it's Macbeth, you can talk about the symbolism of evil in Lady Macbeth or the witches, or how blood does it, what Shakespeare's saying about the nature of evil. Do we all contain it within us, or is it an external force? And it works that way with any text. Symbolism linked to the author's purpose. Right, the next thing you have to do is think of the characters not as real people, but as created by the author. So they are a construct. And then finally, propose an alternative interpretation. Well, because this is a video, I've managed to do this all at the beginning of my essay. And if you practice that, you're on for grades 8 and 9 straight away, even by the time the examiner has got through quarter of your essay or a third of it. Let's see what that looks like. So that's what it looks like in its entirety. That's the beginning of my essay as a whole, and I'm going to break that up for you into different little paragraphs. So first off, the author's purpose. If the inspector's voice and views are a proxy for Priestley's socialist message that we are all one body and responsible for each other, then the younger generation are a proxy for his audience in 1945. So you can see from this that the question must have been about the younger generation. How have I shown the author's purpose? Well, straight away I've used the author's name, here it's Priestley, and I've linked it to what Priestley's trying to achieve, which is to get across the socialist message. Now usually you'll have a character who carries the author's message forward into the text. And the word for that is proxy, and it means replaces the author's view here, okay? So the proxy for Shakespeare's view, you might argue, is Banquo, who doesn't react to the evil of the witches. Or you might decide that Shakespeare is instead an atheist, and many aspects of Macbeth's character are the proxy for his view. There isn't a right and wrong answer here. The point is, it's your personal response, so you're deciding which character's viewpoint represents the author's viewpoint. And it doesn't always represent, but you can play with this idea. Now I've used this again here where I've said the younger generation are a proxy for the audience in 1945. So hopefully you can see how I've explored the author's purpose, mentioning their name, using this idea of a character or a thing being a proxy, and relating it to some kind of purpose and message in the text. Okay, well let's have a look at our next screen. So my next job is to talk about the symbolism. So Sheila is the most impressed by the inspector, and he remarks that we often do make an impression on the young ones. She observes that he inspected us all right and welcomes his teaching that we must look after everyone, all the John Smiths and Eva Smiths, symbolizing the working classes. And so there you have it. One thing, the John Smiths and Eva Smiths, is symbolic of something else, the working classes. And if you simply use the word symbol or symbolizes, then you will be successful. Next, we have this idea that the characters are created for a purpose. They are a construct. Let's see what that looks like in an essay. The inspector creates these characters not just because they are young, but also because they will have most power in this capitalist society. Sheila and Eric will inherit the Burling's wealth and status, and Gerald will inherit the wealth of Cross Limited and his father's status. They represent not just the ruling classes, but also the rich who control and own all major industry in the country. So let's pause there and ask yourself which part of this deals with the characters as a construct, and I shall reveal that now. So hopefully you spotted it was this last section here, and crucially this word represents. So that is an easy way to show the reader that you are dealing with the characters as a construct, because each character represents something else to the author and therefore to the reader. Okay, well now we get to the final feature, and I've left it till last because it's the one that's going to get you the highest marks. This idea of the alternative interpretation. Let's look what this looks like. We've dealt with two characters already, Eric and Sheila, and now we're going to look at Gerald. Gerald, however, is slightly different. Although Eric agrees with the inspector that workers ought to be able to strike, we try for higher profits, why shouldn't they try for higher wages? Gerald disagrees. Because he so passionately disagrees, Priestley decides it should be Gerald who exposes the inspector as a fake. Gerald takes command and begins behaving as though nothing has happened. In this way, Priestley questions whether the younger generation will actually turn out like Gerald rather than like Sheila and Eric. So hopefully you can see the way I've structured this, dealing with Eric and Sheila first, then allows me to say that actually the inspector is going to focus on Gerald to offer us this alternative interpretation. Now, the usual interpretation of this play is that Priestley thinks the younger generation have learnt the lesson in the form of Sheila and Eric, and everything will be all right in the future. But actually, I don't offer that interpretation. Now, it doesn't matter whether I'm right or not. Remember, it just matters that I'm offering a personal interpretation. And an easy way to show that it's personal is to take a different view from the one that's conventional. Obviously, I do think I'm right, but this view is that the younger generation would have prevented the Second World War. You know, had Sheila and Eric grown up post-1912, learning the inspector's lesson, they would have learned from the tragedy of the First World War and would have steered society away from this capitalist society that led to the Second World War, in Priestley's view. So you can see, in historical terms, Priestley is saying, no, the younger generation didn't learn the lesson, and that's why we're in this mess again with the Second World War. So hopefully you can see there how offering that alternative interpretation forces the examiner to think, wow, this is a sophisticated personal response. So finally on this, the extract that I've just given you is from the essay writing stage that I've got to in my guide. So I'm nearly at the end of my guide. I'm desperate to get it out by the end of January. I don't know if I'm going to make it by February half term now, but anyway, it's nearly here. And I will be publishing some of it for free, so look out for that in the next couple of weeks. But before all that, I'm going to give you a little bit of magic at the end of the video here, because the personal response, as you can see here, is assessment objective 1. But if you think about the response I've just written following those 4 simple rules, have I analysed language? Yes, I've got embedded quotations all the way through there. Have I written about how the authors created meanings? Yes, of course, because I've talked about the author's purpose. So I've hit everything in AO1 and I've hit everything in AO2. Let's look at AO3, where I have to write about the relationships between the text and the context in which they were written. Well, I've written about the 1945 audience, haven't I? When I've discussed the author's purpose. So, in offering my personal response following the Mr. Salles 4 things to focus on, I've also hit every single assessment objective, and that's at the beginning of my essay, and the examiner is thinking, wow, can I give this student a grade 8 or a 9? The answer is yes, you can. So practice and it will come to you easily. Good luck in your revision. Here's a reminder of the 4 things that you should focus on. And if you like this, don't forget to subscribe.